Hi. So I'm really nervous to make this video, but I've been thinking about making it for a long time now. It's not my usual singing stuff, but I feel like I have a lot to say and a lot to offer. And this last year's been crazy. The past couple years in general have been, but this year has been a huge transformation year, and I've learned a lot, and I realized I have a lot of heavy things that I've come out of that other people could probably relate to, that I feel called to talk about. It's funny, like, I'm obsessed with TikTok. I love TikTok. And I go on there and I feel like people are reading my mind. Like, everybody says things that I'm like so resonate with, seems like it's straight out of my own mind. So I've figured recently that's given me the confidence and the strength to share these things now with you, because somebody's got to be thinking the same things as me. There's a lot of things I specifically want to talk about in videos to come, not limited to, but including my eating disorder, depression, anxiety, my sleep disorder, which is hypersomnia, also insomnia, leaving the Mormon Church, going through multiple spiritual awakenings, and breaking out of the Matrix. So I feel like I have a lot to unpack, and I haven't been ready to make these videos because I've had to do a lot of the self-inner work, and I'm still doing that, but I finally feel like I'm at a good spot of healing that I can talk about these things without resentment or hate. So specifically today I'm going to talk about why I left the Mormon Church. So just a disclaimer, these videos are not to explain myself to Mormon people or people that knew me when I was Mormon, or to my family or anybody. That's great if you want to watch them. I don't feel the need to explain myself for my choices, but I do feel like there are people that are like me that have been through similar situations that could really benefit from hearing somebody else's experience that's close to theirs, so they don't feel as alone. So maybe if you're watching this and you are Mormon or have Mormon kids or family, or if you're part of my family and you want to better understand me, just have an open mind and open heart. I've tried to be doing that, so you can kind of understand where I'm coming from. Just to preface, this has been something that's been really liberating, but it's been something that's been really hard. I think people think I'm like going through a phase and I'm just trying to like have fun and I'm going to come back eventually. It's not the case. I mean, I am having fun, but this has also been so hard and heartbreaking because I'm literally reprogramming how I've been taught to think my entire life, which is really fucking hard. And it's really lonely and heartbreaking, honestly, because that's all you know. And that's the comfort you know, and you're choosing to do something so different. It's so hard. So don't think I'm out here just having just a grand old time. I mean, it's been really liberating and freeing, and I've found a lot of joy, but a lot of pain. Okay, so I've broken down into 3 categories, basically what ultimately led me to leave. It's culture, doctrine, and mindset. First, with culture, Mormon culture is hard, especially if you do not fit the mold. So being a person of color already knocks you down, kinda. And then being not the usual family. My dad was not Mormon, didn't ever want to be Mormon, or didn't go to church with us. So my mom was Mormon, raised us in it. So I always felt kind of off and judged that I'm coming into this church and I'm not in the ideal family that they preach about having. And I mean, ultimately they talk about how your end goal is to get to what they call the celestial kingdom. That's a whole nother thing. But in the end, when you go to heaven, there's 3 tiers of heaven, and you want to be in the top one. And in order to be the top one, you have to be baptized into the church, and you have to be married in the temple, and your family needs to be sealed together, which means you guys have this ordinance that binds you in heaven. And if you're not going. and you can go to the second one. That always really bummed me out, and I talked about that with my sister, how from the beginning of your life, when you're 5 years old, you know you're like a second-tier person, and that's not going to happen for you unless you work your ass off to build that dream family. So I put a lot of pressure on myself, but I remember like being like 5 years old, looking for shooting stars, wishing that my dad would become Mormon, because I felt like my family was not going to heaven together, because it's just not how it works in church. I just always felt like an outsider, and my faith kept me going because I actually believed in a lot of the things that I was taught, and also guilt kept me going. But it's a very gossipy environment, and I think it's because maybe it's a small place where you're so isolated, you feel only understood by people in the church. So you're taught to like, sure, you can have non-member friends if you're going to try to bring them into the church, but like stick with people who have your standards, like date people who are in the church, have friends that are in the church. A lot of Mormons are mean. Like, people in general are too. It's not just Mormons, but like, that was a really catty circle to be in, even with adults. Adult women are like, Mormon women also just talk their shit. And I realized that even when I went to college, I went to a small Mormon college of like 3,000 kids, but like everybody knew each other's shit and like also hooked up with the same people, which is kind of incesty and weird. But everybody needs to know everything about everybody and talks and talks. And I'm like, don't you guys have hobbies? So that was another thing. It's very judgy. I felt a lot of judgment from the time that I was little, like going to our like weekly mutual, which is like your church activities in the week. I'm like 12 years old and I'm wearing shorts that are not even that short, but I'm feeling judged because either my leaders say something or other girls are snickering or whatever, and I'm like, bro, I'm wearing shorts. Why are you sexualizing me? So that was always hard. I wore a spaghetti strap jumpsuit to my senior year prom, and I was the called or assigned leader to the like older girls section for the church at that time in my area. And I got called out by the bishop. This 50-year-old dude just calls me into his office to just shame me for my prom pictures. And then he proceeds to, in church on Sunday, talk about it at the pulpit and tell everybody that I didn't respect myself and I was trying to get attention from the world, and that people should learn from my experience that I did the wrong thing. And that was one of the times. There were many times when I was going to leave and I went inactive because I just couldn't handle the culture, could not handle the people. So that was pretty fucked up. A lot of it is very separation based. You see things in such a weird way as like everybody's either in the church or they're not. So you see members or non-members. You also see less active members, members who got their name removed from the church and you're like, ooh, they're bad. There's just so many labels, so much separation. Everybody else seemed like a threat, and that members were your safe spot. And that was one of the realizations that I had when I started leaving the church, is that I started making friends with people of all religions and backgrounds, and they're not scary people. They're not bad people. In fact, all the friends and people that I've met, since I've left have been some of the best people in my life. And I now see people as just people. But when you're out in the world, when you're Mormon, you kind of do have these goggles and this view of separation. Mormon church is very old-fashioned and traditional. It feels very 50s to me, that your main goal is to create an eternal family. No, totally cool if you're trying to have a kid, do that thing, whatever. That's not for everybody, but it's really pushed into you. So I feel like education is not even super valued for women. It's just like, you go to school to get married, which is weird because you're taught like your whole life, you're just shamed to be perfect and pure and to date in huge groups and to not single off and not do whatever with dudes, but then they want you to get married at like 19. So that doesn't make sense to me. But I always, for a long time, felt a lot of pressure because I wasn't dating, I wasn't close to marriage, and that's fucked up because I was like 20 years old. I'm referring to my notes, and I wrote down, Mormons use Christ's name, but few act like him. I'll leave that there. Okay, second, doctrine-wise, I'm not even going to get into these. I'm just going to name them. You can look them up yourself. This is like classic anti-Mormon stuff that the church warns you like to not think about. Their views on gay marriage and gay people. And I've said black people in the priesthood, just black people in general. Things became very clear this year to me, just in general about Christians with Black Lives Matter, that people just really showed their true colors this year. Shame and guilt around sex and your sexuality. I'm going to make a whole separate video about that. Temple marriage. I guess I'll just make a whole separate video about the temple too because I'm scarred by that. Tithing. That's also, I'm just gonna have to make a whole separate video for a specific doctrine that, like, I don't fuck with. Like, especially Word of Wisdom. You see drinking and drugs as the worst thing in the entire world, yet Mormon people are, like, addicted to prescription pills and Diet Coke, and yet at the same time, like, you can't go in the temple or you have to, like, repent because you had coffee. So, okay, lastly, mindset. This is your programming that you've been taught to think since you were little, and that is really where my trauma comes in from the church and things that I've had to unlearn. There's a lot of good that I had from the church, but I think you could find that in any church, about just being a good person, feeling loved, loving other people. I think that's just basic human decency. You do not rely on yourself, you rely on God. And there's nothing wrong with believing in a higher power, and, you know, I think that there is something out there that's helping us, but it's never about empowering yourself or having the power yourself. It's just this, like, up and down addiction of you're always in the wrong, but God will save you. So you feel this high when you feel God's love and forgiveness because you chose to change and do something right. But then the rest of the time when you're trying to do things, you always are feeling like you're doing something wrong. When in reality, like, I always felt like that. I hadn't drank, I hadn't smoked, I hadn't even kissed like a boy very many times. Like, the church is so perfectionist and breeds an all or nothing mindset that's very toxic. Like I said, it's very all or nothing. They tell you often, like, you can't pick and choose the commandments that you want to follow. And I think that's kind of messed up because wouldn't you rather have somebody that's trying versus somebody who just doesn't try at all because they can't do everything? I've just always not liked authority and being told what to do by my parents or by anybody. That's just part of my personality. So that was always really hard for me, to be a servant. I still have a relationship. I don't call him God. I don't call him a him. That's part of the doctrine that's really not for me, is being a woman of color. I don't want to worship a white male. That never felt relevant to me and never felt true to me. I think those are just like Christian depictions that we've come up with that are these whitewashed versions of what God and what Jesus look like, and that's not what they look like to me. I mean, I kind of don't even believe in them anyway, so I guess it doesn't matter. I was never really able to ask questions. They tell you to ask questions, pray, and receive an answer, but whenever I asked questions to people in authority, I was always told to put it on the shelf, or to stop asking that, or to just trust God, and that it'll be answered in the next life. So I never really received answers to my questions, and then I found answers on my own, from my own intuition and from my own connection to myself and the universe. I felt like a lot of times there was a lack of love. It's very emphasized to forget yourself, think about others, serve other people, which is a great thing, but there needs to be a balance of you loving yourself and valuing yourself and taking care of yourself. And I felt like the love was very conditional from members and from God. And that's something that I had to realize after I was leaving, that God's love does not go away because you drank coffee or because you didn't follow a commandment. Like, that was just a very toxic thing for me, being a perfectionist, that I felt like I had this responsibility. I mean, you're told, like, you're responsible because you have the gospel at this time in your life and you have to do what's right. You know better. So anytime that I just didn't want to do religion or do the church, like, I felt guilty about it because I knew I was being defiant and there was something wrong with that and I wasn't going to get blessed. It's very much about, like, you do things to gain blessings, and if you don't, then those blessings are withheld from you. And you always have this mindset when all you've known is the church is that you are going to be happiest in the church and that people who are not in it are not receiving those blessings, so thus they are not happy. They are not as happy as you are. When in reality, out of the church, I'm the happiest I've ever been. So I realized that was false. I want to talk about a couple experiences that I had that kind of made me realize my system of this religion was cracking and that it wasn't necessarily true. Probably like the first time that I drank or smoked or had sex, like I didn't feel any guilt. I didn't feel like God hated me. I didn't feel anything. And that was confirming to me over and over that this pressure I put on myself was from people and not from God. Overall, there was good and bad in all of being in the church. I'm grateful. I think it was what I needed at the time, that it helped me. I think whatever you got to do in your life to cope and to find happiness in this life, just do it. Doesn't really matter as long as you're happy. And for a while it did make me happy, but there were a lot of parts that did damage me and caused a lot of trauma and a lot of hurt that it's okay, I'm reprogramming it now and I'm becoming my happiest, most authentic self, and that's all that matters to me. So I'm going to keep talking about this and some other things, but hopefully this will help people feel less alone, maybe help people feel more understood. And for other people who are Mormon, who are wondering why people leave, maybe you'll be more open to hear people out and recognize these things. Ultimately, for me, in summary, I didn't like being a part of a community where I didn't feel welcome. I didn't like doctrine that felt like was going against my own truth, and how I think other people should be treated and how I think I should be treated. And I didn't like the mindset that it was giving me of shame and guilt and never being worthy. And I'm grateful that I'm unlearning things and I'm figuring out what makes me the happiest, and I'll just keep sharing it and hopefully can help somebody else too.